The church recently held an election for a leadership role. When I learned the upper leadership planned to promote Sister Zhao, I couldn't help but think, Sister Zhao. As a leader, she'd sown jealousy and discord, suppressed and punished others, harming her brothers and sisters, disrupting and interrupting the church's work. The sisters and brothers had exposed her many times, but she never accepted any of it and was later replaced. Had she reflected upon and come to know herself? Had she repented? But then I thought, if the leadership is planning to promote her, they must have evaluated her case by principle. She must have repented to a degree. And after all, the leadership election is a matter for the upper leadership and is not as relevant for me. I shouldn't worry about it.
The election of church leaders is a big deal. And it's the duty of God's chosen to safeguard it. You should care about it.
That's right.
You're right. At the time, I didn't think any more of it. A few days later, the leaders held a gathering in which they discussed the principles of elections and read some evaluations of Sister Zhao. From the evaluations, I learned that when Sister Zhao was dealt with, she was resentful and would argue, struggling to accept truth. What's more, these evaluations made no mention of how she viewed her past transgressions. I thought to myself, if Sister Zhao hasn't reflected and come to know herself, then she must not pursue or accept the truth.
Yes.
If she is elected leader again, won't she just continue to sow jealousy and discord and suppress people? But then I thought, I haven't seen her much these couple of years. I don't know her very well. So I shouldn't worry about this. What's most important is my own work. Anyways, it doesn't really matter who serves as leader. At the time, I just let the matter be and life went on. A few days later, the leaders held another gathering. They said that there were brothers and sisters who opposed Sister Zhao's promotion, thinking she hadn't reflected or understood her own transgressions and hadn't repented, and so should not be promoted. The leaders investigated Sister Zhao's situation thoroughly, making sure that allegations made were factual, and made a judgment based on principle that Sister Zhao was indeed unfit to be a leader. When I learned this, I felt ashamed. Why were others able to report issues when they saw them and safeguard the church's election, while I stood by and didn't take the matter seriously? What was I thinking? Realizing all this, I felt a bit down. So I came before God to seek and pray. What lessons should I learn from this situation? I came across this passage of God's words. All who pretend to be spiritual, when they do not understand spiritual matters, are fakes, and they care about nothing except spending all day following rules or parroting doctrines. This is like ancient scholars burying themselves in classics while ignoring their immediate surroundings. Those feigning spirituality find others' actions irrelevant with them, and they see others' thoughts as others' business. They refuse to learn to discern among people, look beyond the surface, and learn God's will based on God's words. Most people are like this. When they've listened to a sermon or read God's word, they make note of it or store it in their hearts, taking it as doctrine or rules, paying token observance, then being done with it. As for how things around them and the behaviors and manifestations in people around them relate to the truth, they never ever ponder or try to fathom this in their hearts, nor do they pray or seek. Such is the shape of many people's spiritual life. Thus, most people are slow and superficial in entering into the truth. Their spiritual life is monotonous. They just follow rules. There is no principle to the way they do things. We could say that, in the case of most people, their spiritual life is empty and out of joint with real life. For this reason, even vis-a-vis the blatant conduct and behaviors of wicked people and antichrists, they have absolutely no concepts, much less any definitions, nor do they have any ideas or make any distinctions.
Amen.
Amen.
Reading God's words, I felt like they were describing my own practice of faith. I'd acted just like God's description, burying themselves in classics while ignoring their immediate surroundings. I believed that it was enough to just fulfill my duties and attend to my portion of the work. Anything beyond that had nothing to do with me. In my mind, I thought that faith in God was just praying, reading God's words, and fulfilling duty. I thought that was how to earn God's favor. Only after reading God's words did I realize how absurd this notion was. God's work is practical and not at all vague. No aspect of it is disconnected from realities. At the same time that He supplies us with truths, He also devises all kinds of situations in our everyday lives to help us experience His words and practice viewing things through the lens of His words so that we can gradually come to understand and gain the truth.
Yes.
Thinking back on that leadership election, some people were able to seek the truth and exercise discernment based on God's words. When they learned the leader wasn't promoted by principle, they were able to stand up in time to safeguard the church's work. Through this situation, they learned to discern people and things and attained practical gains.
That's right.
As for me, I approached the same situation like an outsider, checking out as soon as the election was over, and in no way seeking to know what lessons might be learned from it. And as a result, I gained nothing. My practice of faith was disconnected from my real life. I didn't value experiencing God's work, much less did I seek the truth in the things God devised. No matter what was going on, I always removed myself from the situation, just like a non-believer. As a result, there were many things that I was just oblivious to. And in 10 years of faith, I had come up empty-handed, without gaining any discernment of people. How pitiful and poor.
Yes. If, when we typically encounter an issue, we don't relate it to the truth or practice the truth, then all of our efforts will be in vain and will ultimately gain nothing.
Yes.
True. When I realized I had this problem, I felt pretty down. But I was willing to turn my state around and learn a lesson from that election.
Thank God.
Upon reflecting, I realized the reason I hadn't shown any concern for the leadership election was because I had always held on to the mistaken idea that whoever is elected leader is irrelevant to me. I'd continue practicing faith in God and fulfilling my duties as before, no matter who was elected. Only later, when I found a passage of God's words, did I finally come to grasp the meaning of church leadership elections. Let's watch a video of it.
Okay.
Almighty God says, "What is the cause of the emergence of the category of people who are leaders and workers, and how did they emerge? On a grand scale, they are required for God's work. On a smaller scale, they are required for the work of the church. They are required by God's chosen people." The difference between leaders and workers and the rest of God's chosen people is only a special characteristic in the duties they perform. This special characteristic shows principally in their leadership roles. For example, no matter how many people a church has, the leader is the head. So what role does this leader play among the members? They lead all of the chosen ones in the church. So what effect do they have throughout the whole church? If this leader takes the wrong path, God's chosen people in the church will follow the leader down the wrong path, which will have a huge impact on all of them. Take Paul, for example. He led many of the churches he founded and God's chosen people. When Paul went astray, the churches and God's chosen people he led also went astray. So when leaders go astray, they are not the only ones who are impacted, but the churches and God's chosen people they lead are impacted as well. If a leader is a right person, one who is walking the right path and pursues and practices truth, then the people they lead will eat and drink God's words properly and seek truth properly. And at the same time, the leader's life experience and progress will be visible to others and will impact others. So what is the correct path that a leader should walk? It is being able to lead others to an understanding of the truth and an entry into the truth, and to lead others before God. What is an incorrect path? It is to pursue status, fame, and profit, to frequently elevate oneself and to bear witness to oneself, never bearing witness to God. What effect does this have on God's chosen ones? They will stray far from God and come under this leader's control. If you lead people to come before you, then you are leading them to come before corrupt mankind, and you are leading them to come before Satan, not God. Only leading people to come before truth is leading them to come before God. Leaders and workers, no matter whether they walk the right path or the wrong one, have a direct influence on God's chosen people. When they have yet to understand the truth, many of God's chosen ones follow blindly. The leader could be someone good, and they would follow them. The leader could be someone bad, and they would also follow them. They don't differentiate. They follow as they are led, regardless of who the leader is. And so it is crucial that the churches choose good people to be their leaders. Which path the faithful walk is directly related to the path that is walked by the leaders and workers, and can, to varying degrees, be influenced by those leaders and workers.
Amen. After reading God's words, I realized that leaders have an immense impact on church life and the life entry of God's chosen, and a direct influence on the path people take in their faith. Whether or not the leader is a right person, whether they seek the truth and what path they follow, has a direct impact on the quality of church life.
That's right.
A good leader can use their real-life experience to resolve brothers and sisters' issues and help them understand the truth and enter into it faster. Brothers and sisters can gain certain benefits from the leader. If a leader does not walk the path of seeking truth and only works to keep their status, only ever speaks of doctrine without testifying to God, fails to do practical work, and doesn't resolve people's actual issues, then over time, they will only ever bring people before them and draw them farther and farther away from God, ultimately harming them and bringing them to ruin.
Indeed.
Reflecting on Sister Zhao's behavior, when pruned and dealt with, she would be resentful, argue, and fail to reflect and learn. She hadn't reflected on her past transgressions, much less truly repented. It was clear that Sister Zhao did not seek the truth and didn't possess the qualities of a leader. If elected to a leadership role, she'd only speak of doctrine and wouldn't be truly helpful to people. How could she guide us to understand the truth and enter its reality?
Right. Following someone like that would only lead to everyone's eventual demise.
True. Today's fellowship has helped me realize how important electing a good church leader is. They have a direct impact on our ability to grasp the truth and attain salvation.
We need to take this seriously.
Definitely. But I held to the absurd belief that no matter who is elected, we'd still read God's words, fulfill our duties, live a church life with no major impact. What a foolish notion that was. Then I saw another passage that discussed what kind of attitude people should have during elections and what improper notions they might have. Only then did I start to understand myself. Whenever there is a church election, whether for leaders and workers or God's chosen ones, everyone is responsible and has an obligation to defend the election. Some people simply sit back and watch, saying, I can't become a church leader anyway. Whoever serves is fine. Whoever has the skill can serve. An Antichrist serving isn't my business, and it's fine as long as I'm not cleared out. That is what the most negative people say. They can't imagine the consequences of an Antichrist serving as the leader, and the impact it would have on their belief in God. Only people who understand the truth can see this for what it is. They will say, if an Antichrist becomes the church leader, it is God's chosen ones who will suffer, especially those people who pursue the truth, have a sense of justice, and readily do their duty, all of whom will be suppressed and excluded. Only those muddle-headed people and yes-men will be in favor, and the Antichrist will have captured them in their grasp. But those negative people do not consider these things. They think, one believes in God in order to be saved. Belief is an individual path. Even if an Antichrist becomes the leader, it won't have an impact on me. As long as I don't do bad things, an Antichrist cannot suppress me or exclude me, or purge me from the church. Is this the correct point of view? If none of God's chosen are concerned about church elections, once they allow an Antichrist to take power, what will the consequences be? Will it really be as simple as people imagine? What kind of changes will church life undergo? This directly relates to God's chosen ones entering into life. If an Antichrist holds power in a church, then the truth does not hold power there, and God's words do not hold power there. It is a church where Satan and non-believers hold power. Although God's words may yet be read at gatherings, the Antichrist controls the right to speak. Can they fellowship clearly about the truth? Can they allow God's chosen to freely and openly fellowship the truth? That is impossible. When an Antichrist holds power, there are more disruptions, and church life will surely be diminished in its effect. If that happens, then God's chosen ones will not reap much when they gather, and it could even disrupt their gatherings. The problems of God's chosen ones cannot be resolved. The practice of truth is also disrupted, and the atmosphere of church life is entirely changed. When black clouds appear and block out the sun, does enjoyment remain in church life? It will surely be greatly compromised. Amen.
Amen.
God's words exposed all the ideas and apathetic attitudes of people when they are faced with church elections. It felt as though God were standing before me, judging me. My behavior was exactly the same as what his words exposed. During that election, I realized that Sister Zhao didn't seem to be seeking the truth. But I didn't seek the principles of church leadership elections, failed to consider what would come from Sister Zhao being elected, and I certainly didn't raise my doubts about the election results to the leadership. Instead, I opted to stand by in apathy. I believed that whoever served as leader made no difference. They'd perform their duties and I'd perform mine, completely separate. I also thought that even if there were issues with the election, that was a matter for the upper leadership and was not my problem. I barely paid it any mind and couldn't be bothered about it. So, during that election, I didn't have my own point of view and just blindly followed. Wasn't I practicing faith just like those of the religious world that only concern themselves with filling their bellies, following blindly?
That's right.
I lived by such satanic toxins as, let things drift if they do not affect me. Whoever gives me money and feeds me is my beloved. I just obeyed and followed whomever the leader was, without any discernment. How mistaken I was.
This is a very widespread issue now. People are so confused and don't treat the truth seriously. This is truly the work of Satan's toxins.
That's exactly right. If the church were controlled by antichrists and false leaders, not only would the church's work be disrupted, God's chosen would also be harmed. And their chances of attaining salvation would be destroyed.
That's right.
Despite this being so important, I still acted in such a selfish and apathetic manner. Where was my conscience and rationality? I thought of God's words. If you do not truly devote yourself to your faith and duty, only going through the motions and being perfunctory in your actions. Like an unbeliever working for their boss. If you just toil, you don't use your mind, muddling through each day, not reporting problems when you see them, seeing a spill and not cleaning it up, and indiscriminately dismissing everything that is not to your own benefit, then is this not trouble? How could such a person be of God's house? They are unbelievers, not of God's house. God doesn't acknowledge any of them.
Amen.
Based on God's words, my behaviors were not those of a person of God's house. I had believed in God for years and read his words freely, enjoying his grace and blessings, yet I failed to safeguard church work. No matter what kind of interruption or disruption occurred in the church, or how much damage was done to the work of God's house, I just turned a blind eye to it, not bothering to worry about it. I was so selfish and despicable. I was an unbeliever in God's house, and in God's eyes, I was just a non-believer. In this case, the person promoted wasn't suitable for the job, and I'd acted indifferently. If an antichrist or evildoer controlled the church, manipulating an election, and someone needed to stand up and fight back against them, I would shrink away or stand by apathetically. I wouldn't step up and safeguard the work of God's house. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how God despised my apathetic attitude toward the work of God's house. If I kept acting like that, I would eventually be cast out. Upon reflection, I also realized I was mistaken to think that the upper leadership supervises and oversees the leader's work. So all the decisions that they make must be according to principle, and that there is nothing to question. Through reading God's words, I realized this view was not in accord with the truth. When someone in the church is promoted and cultivated to be a leader, they are promoted and cultivated in the simple sense. It does not mean that they are already a qualified leader or a competent one, that they are already capable of undertaking the work of a leader and can do real work. That is not the case. Most people do not see clearly about these things, and they look up to these promoted ones relying on their imaginings, but this is a mistake. No matter how many years they may have believed, do those promoted have the reality of truth? Not necessarily. Can they bring the house of God's work arrangements to fruition? Not necessarily. Do they have a sense of responsibility? Are they committed? Can they submit to God? When they encounter an issue, can they search for the truth? All of this is unknown. Do these people have a heart that fears God? And how great is their fear of God? Are they liable to follow their own will? Are they able to seek God? While performing the work of leaders, do they regularly and frequently come before God to search for the will of God? Are they able to guide people into the reality of the truth? They are incapable of such things right away. They haven't been trained and lack experience, so they're incapable of these things. This is why promoting and cultivating someone doesn't mean they already understand the truth. Nor is it saying they're already able to do their duty satisfactorily. People must not have high expectations or unrealistic demands of those who are promoted and cultivated. That would be unreasonable and unfair on them. You can monitor their work, and if you discover problems or things that violate principles in the course of their work, you can raise the issue and seek the truth to resolve this. But you should not judge, condemn, attack, or exclude them, because they are in the cultivation period, and should not be viewed as people who have been made perfect, much less as people who are perfect, or as people who are possessed of the reality of the truth. They are like you. This is the time when they are being trained. The difference is that they undertake more work and responsibilities than ordinary people. They have a responsibility and an obligation to do more work. They pay a greater price, suffer more hardship, take more pains, solve more problems, tolerate the censure of more people, and of course, make a greater effort, have less sleep, eat less fine food, and engage in less chit-chat than normal people. This is what's special about them. Apart from this, they are the same as anyone else. What is the point of me saying this? To tell everyone they must correctly approach the promotion and cultivation of various talents in God's house, and must not be harsh in their demands of these people. Naturally, people must not be unrealistic in their opinion of them either. It is foolish to be overly appreciative or reverential of them. Nor is it humane or realistic to be overly harsh in your demands toward them. Amen.
Amen.
Through God's words, I realized that leaders are no different from brothers and sisters. They are also being cultivated and trained. It's due to the needs of the church's work that some people must be promoted to this special role.
That's right.
However, that doesn't mean that they're a qualified leader or worker, or that they have the reality of truth. I should view them in light of God's words and approach them in a just and objective manner. I shouldn't have overly lofty expectations or demands of them, and shouldn't be overly critical. As a member of the church, I have a responsibility to monitor the work of leaders and workers, and coordinate with them to safeguard the church's work.
Yes.
When leaders act according to the truth, I should accept it. But if I find that leaders are having issues or deviations, I should expose and correct them right away and help them make a change, as this benefits the work of God's house.
True.
If false leaders or antichrists appear in the church, I should report them to their superiors. This is being responsible for the church's work and for myself, and more so, is fulfilling my responsibilities and duties.
Right.
When I understood how to treat leaders and workers, I felt much clearer and had a path of practice.
Thank God.
Thank God.
Sometime later, I observed that the leader, Sister Liu, wasn't supervising the watering work, saying that she was too busy to attend to it. When brothers and sisters came to her with issues, she would even be resentful that they were making more work for her. I thought to myself, leaders are responsible for a lot of work, but one can always prioritize. They don't need to do all the work personally. They can assign someone to keep up with some work, and then evaluate and supervise after the fact.
Yes.
If a leader always uses being busy as an excuse and doesn't oversee the work they're responsible for or just goes through the motions, that's serious negligence, not practical work. And I should report this issue to their superior. But then I thought that I shouldn't be concerned with how the leader was performing in her job, and I should just make sure to fulfill my own duties. Just then I thought of God's words. It is everyone's responsibility to keep an eye on whether leaders and workers are doing real work, whether they use the truth to solve problems.
Amen.
I realized that I had the wrong idea. I should remind the leader and help her correct her issue quickly. So I plucked up my courage and finally raised the issue with her. The leader said, you're right. This really is an issue. I will definitely think this over. I was really moved to hear her say that.
Thank God.
After that, I saw that the leaders started actively keeping up with the watering work and also resolved some practical issues facing that work.
Thank God. Safeguarding the church's interests, this is really beneficial to our brothers and sisters in the church's work.
Yes.
Right. This experience helped me realize that no matter our duty, we all must safeguard the work of the church. This is everyone's responsibility and duty.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank God.
Thanks be to
Thank
God.
God.